Yeah, a couple of powerful ministries going on there, and it's ongoing. Quintin, come on up. We're going to continue with our Bible study. Quintin's the pastor at Kingscliff, I believe. Yes. We've never met.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, Buster Mike is my
nice
name. And that was where I began my whole journey with God.
Yeah. Awesome.
When we were in the old Tweed Heads Church.
Yeah. Awesome.
So I know a lot of the folks down that way.
Oh, awesome.
But it's been a long time ago.
You should come and visit.
Yeah, I'll have to. I just got to get a weekend off to do it. we will. We'll definitely do that. Let me pray for you before you begin. Father, we thank you for the call that you've made in each of our lives and every person here. Father, you've called us to witness the wonderful works and the wonderful words and the wonderful worship that we share with you. Father, I pray now that your Spirit would come upon Quintin in a special way. May the words he speak to us resonate with each one of us. Encourage us in our journey of faith, in our journey of sharing you with others. Bless him to this end, I pray, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Mike. Good morning, everybody. There we go. That's what I like to hear. Good to have you guys join us again. We are talking about God in the search bar this morning as we continue with our talk. Have you guys been enjoying camp meeting so far, Big Camp? It's been good. I've only arrived yesterday, as I said, and I've been enjoying going around. This is my second year that I've been here, and I really, really enjoy this camp meeting. Everybody's so friendly, and it's good to connect with people that I know. I went for a little jog this morning and saw quite a few people cycling and running and walking, so that's really good to be amongst people that are like-minded, that want to move and want to worship God and want to live the good life. Today we're going to continue our talk. If you didn't join us yesterday, let me see. Yesterday they said the clicker didn't work because of user error. Let's just see if that is the case. Because this morning I don't have my... Do I need to point it somewhere? Let's see if this time I don't think it's user error. There we go. It seems to be working now. Let's try this. So, yesterday we spoke about God in the search bar, and we're basically just unpacking this one command of Jesus, go therefore, which is a command for all of us. This is Christ's last command that he gave to us, and we need to take that very seriously. So yesterday in our first session, we spoke about this idea of the reality that we live in as Christians and as people living in the West, that we are living in a world that is still spiritual, they're just not spiritual with us. Meaning that the church is out, but spirituality is still in. And just to recap, if you weren't here yesterday, I just want to have 5 points to recap because this is going to be important for our conversation today. Yesterday we spoke about what was happening, and today we're going to speak about why it's happening. So we saw that Christianity is in the decline. We saw that the nuns are rising, those that are not affiliating with any religion. Then we saw that spirituality was shifting. It's not dead, it is just remixed. People are still seeking for spirituality, but it's more personal, it's consumer-driven, and it's anti-institutional. We see that the younger generation, specifically Gen Z, are very, very open. They're actually being dubbed the open generation. And then there's a missionary moment for all of us. There's great optimism that we can have in this idea that secular does not mean godlessness. But that means that just they are post-institutional. For us as Seventh-day Adventists in a very rigid institutional church that has a lot of hierarchies, we have to understand that we have to, in our local context, change a few things because people are against institutions. So programs are not enough. And I want to be very, very clear on this point, is that I am not saying that we should throw out the baby with the bathwater. Programs are good. There's a place for programs. We shouldn't be like, well, let's just go to home churches and not have churches anymore. We need churches. We need programs. We need all of those things, but we can't rely on those things as the only thing, right? There's a lot of stuff that needs to happen before we can bring them to the programs. So our mission needs to be relational, incarnational, and personal. That's what we need to focus on. So today we're going to talk about, in session 2, your truth, your God, and your way. This kind of personalized way that we view faith, from a collective conviction to a personalized spirituality. How did we get to a place that 50 years ago or 100 years ago, And for hundreds of years before that, people saw the value of a church, a community, getting together, and now it's this island that you're by yourself and you worship the way that you want to. What happened in those shifts? That's what we want to unpack today. But I want to start off, since this is Bible application, with the story of Daniel. Daniel, and specifically Daniel chapter 1. I don't know about you, but I love the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel, Revelation are some of the most important books that we can read, especially as we get closer to the end of time. Now, yesterday somebody mentioned to me that I speak very fast. My wife and various other people have said to me that sometimes it's like drinking from a fire hydrant. There's just too much coming out too quickly. Now, today's talk is going to be a little bit like that, right? Some of it is my personality, and I'm trying to change it, so pray for me. But part of it is also that as an academic, I don't want you just to trust what I say. I will give you enough data so that you'll be like, I see where he got there. So there's certain parts of my talk that I will go very quickly. Don't get drowned in the lot of water that's coming out. Just hang on with me. We'll slow down at the most important points. And the stuff that I go very quickly, it probably means I'm just giving it to you to kind of put the puzzle pieces together. Are we good? Right, so we're going to look at Daniel. Now, if you're a Seventh-day Adventist, if you're a Christian, you should know Daniel really, really well. It is one of the most important books of our denomination, right? Now, so this is the structure of Daniel. There's 3 sections to the book of Daniel, really. There's an introduction, Daniel chapter 1. Then there's the historical section, which is written in Aramaic. Means it's all the stories. And then there's the prophetic section at the end, 7 to the end there, right? The first section, the story introduction, Daniel chapter 1, the main idea of Daniel chapter 1 is the idea that God is who in control is the one that gives. One of the key words in the book of Daniel, in Daniel chapter 1, is the word Natan. The Hebrew word Natan. It means that God gives. God is the one that gives Jerusalem to Nebuchadnezzar. God is the one that gives wisdom. God is the one that gives favor. But we see that Daniel chapter 1 is essentially like a theological seedbed, if you will, right? That gives us all the major motifs for the rest of the book. So let's go through it very, very quickly. Daniel chapter 2, God gives the vision to Nebuchadnezzar, and then he gives the vision to Daniel and the interpretation to Daniel. Daniel chapter 3, God gives protection to Daniel's 3 friends. Daniel chapter 4, God gives Nebuchadnezzar the wisdom to know, hey, you've messed up. You are not the center of the universe, right? God tells him, I am the one that gives power to kings, and I'm the one that removes that. I am the one in charge, not you. You are not the top dog. You're not the main guy in the story, right? Daniel chapter 5, he tries to teach that to Belshazzar, but Belshazzar doesn't listen, so he gives judgment to Belshazzar. Daniel chapter 6, once again, God delivers Daniel from the lion's den. Daniel chapter 7, God gives vision, God gives judgment. If you know the book of Daniel, you'll also know that it's written in a chiastic structure, meaning that it all moves to a center point. The center point for the book of Daniel is Daniel chapter 7, and the center point of Daniel chapter 7 is God giving his judgment. Right? So the whole book, Daniel's name literally means, may God be my judge, or God is my judge, right? So the whole book of Daniel is surrounding God judging. And that's a good thing for us that are being oppressed by nations and people and powers that are not God's powers, right? For people in exile. And then we see Daniel chapter 8, God giving his justifying judgment again and speaking about the sanctuary being cleansed. And then the crux of all of it is Messiah the Prince, where all of this resides in is Messiah the Prince that will come. And then Daniel chapter 10 to 12 is the last prophecy where God will give ultimate deliverance to God's people. This is the whole book of Daniel kind of wrapped up in one kind of story, right? And so the point of Daniel chapter 1, if you understand in the context of the structure of Daniel chapter 1, you will see that Daniel 1 is not merely a children's story about eating your vegetables. We reduce that, Daniel chapter 1, often to 1, eat your vegetables, and 2, God said we must be vegetarian. I don't want to break this to you, but God doesn't say to Daniel, be a vegetarian for all of his life, because later on he eats meat again, right? Now that doesn't mean that we should not follow the health message, but there's this theological point what he's trying to say. The reason that he eats the fruit that he eats is because it's connecting that to the worship of the Creator, which is one of the motifs of Daniel and of Revelation. So Daniel chapter 1 is a very, very important story of a man, a believer, a remnant of God's faithful people that are in exile in Babylon. The word Babylon means Babel, confusion. if you go back and trace the history of Babylon, you will go to to Genesis 11. Now, what's interesting in the book of Genesis is the book of Genesis is broken up into two sections. The first is primeval history, Genesis 1 to 11, which is all of humanity. Then from chapter 12 to chapter 50 is about Abraham and his sons. What is interesting is if you go to Genesis 11, where we have the Tower of Babel, the people there, they dismiss what God has told them. God says, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. And they say, no, we will not disperse. We will stay here. And then they say something quite important. They say, we will make a name for ourselves. They're saying, we don't need God to make a name for ourselves. We will make a name for ourselves. In the next chapter, in Genesis 12, God says to Abraham, go, and I will make a name for yourself. Here we see the goal of both Genesis 11 and Genesis 12 is the same thing, making our name great. But God says, I will make your name great, but be obedient to me. I will show you the way. And Genesis 11 is this individualistic, I will do it my own way. I don't need God. So at the root of Babylon is this idea that we don't need God for anything. Right? It's the seedbed for all of these things. And so Daniel is a faithful person that follows in the line of Abraham, not in the line of Babylon, right? And so we too are children of Abraham that live in exile at the moment. We do not live in the New Jerusalem yet. And so there's lots of stories that's quite important to us. And a second point that I want to mention to this structure of Daniel that's very important to us. Can you see how all the stories of Daniel are clumped in the beginning, and then all the prophecies are at the outer rim almost? And that is very important. Oftentimes in Scripture, God will give us narratives and stories that tell us certain things, and then there's explanation for those things. So the stories tell us that there's a man in exile, but God will deliver him and his friends. That he is the one that worships God, that he is the one that trusts in God, and God is the one that gives. And then the prophecies only prophesy that cycle will continue until the end of time. And so we, like Daniel, we can find refuge in God, and we can look at the stories of Daniel as prototypical to what will happen to us. We will be persecuted like Daniel or his three friends. We will be forced not to worship like Daniel, or we will be forced to worship like his friends. If you look at Daniel chapter 3 and Daniel chapter 6, both of them are about worship. Daniel chapter 3 is about worshiping something that is not God. Where's Daniel in the story? He's not there. If you look at the story in Daniel chapter 6, you'll see that the story there is Daniel is forced not to worship his God. Where's his three friends? They are missing. So there are similarities and dissimilarities to these stories that bring out theological points. The same with chapter 4 and chapter 5. They connect with each other. Both are pagan kings. God has a heart for pagans. God has a heart for unbelievers. God has a heart for those in Babylon and even the leaders of Babylon. Some of them will be judged and found wanting. Some of them will be saved when they repent and turn to God. Right? And so in very similar ways, we are in Babylon. We are called to minister to people in Babylon, just like Daniel was called to minister like that. Right? So the first point is not just about eating your vegetables. So as I mentioned, it's like the theological seedbed. Now there are three things in the story of Daniel chapter 1 that is important for us in terms of his resistance against Babylon or Babylonian influences. The first one is in chapter 1 verse 4. It says that he was to be taught the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. Quick question. Did Daniel refuse the teaching and the literature of the Chaldeans? Yes or no? No, he went with it, right? He was learning what was happening in Babylon. He did not give an active resistance towards that. The second one that we see is that he was given the daily portion of food. Did he give an active resistance against that? Yes. Now what's interesting, in the verse where it says that Nebuchadnezzar determined the menu, the Hebrew word there, vayaman, it is used only, outside of the context of Daniel, it is only used for God as the creator determining certain things for his people. So what Daniel is saying by using the word vayaman, he's saying that in the rest of Scripture, when God determines something, he does it as creator, as God. In this story, Nebuchadnezzar says, your God is dead and gone. You're in my land now. I determine what you eat. And so he's setting himself up as the new creator, as the new redeemer, as the one that says, your God is gone, I'm your new God, right? And so what we see here is Daniel is saying, I am not going to fall for that. Even the idea of the meat and wine association. In biblical context, meat and wine is always in context of worship services. So the food was not just pig and pork and unclean food, but it was food that was sacrificed to idols. And so sitting at that table, partaking of that, one, you are saying that I am participating in the food and wine that was sacrificed to idols. And so as I'm partaking of it, they might think that I have acquiesced to this. And two, I realize that Nebuchadnezzar is saying that he is my new creator. He is my new God. And so when Daniel says, no, give me this new diet, what he's actually saying, and if you look at the phraseology, it's a direct quotation from Genesis chapter 1. Daniel says, give me the Creator's diet because I am standing for the Creator and He will provide for me. The second one we see is that Daniel was given names. Daniel and his 3 friends were given names. So the first one, literature and the literature and language of the Chaldeans. Did he give an act of resistance against that? No. Did he give an act of resistance against the food? Yes, because it had to do with worship, right? The second one, did he have an active resistance against the names? Kind of, right? Now in the English you wouldn't catch this. You have to do a bit of archaeological digging and look in the actual Hebrew, but you'll see there that Daniel and his friends have specific names. In certain stories you see their Hebrew names, and other stories you see their Babylonian names. So Daniel's name is God is my judge, and that was changed to Belteshazzar. Mishael, his name was changed to Meshach, and his Hebrew name means who is like God. Hananiah was changed to the grace of God. Azariah was changed to Abednego, his name is Yahweh has helped. So each of them, their name is connected to their identity as worshippers of the true God. But when you look at the archaeological evidence, you look at the Hebrew, you'll actually see that they had changed their names. Daniel changed their names because Daniel was actually not called Belteshazzar, he was called Belshazzar. Belshazzar means may Bel preserve my life. Bel is a patron deity of the Babylonians. Meshach should have actually been called Mashalim Marduk, which means he's according to the order of Aku, or who is like Aku. Aku was another god of the Babylonian pantheon. Shadrach should have been Shada Aku, the order of Aku, and Abednego should have been called Ardinabu, which means servant of Nego. Nego is another god here. So what we see what Daniel is doing here, he is creatively saying, you want to call me a Babylonian name? I'll give you a Babylonian name that you can call me. And he changes the name so that it's basically gibberish. So instead of saying, how Belteshazzar, and identifying with Bel, he is now called Belteshazzar, which means nothing. It's pretty clever, isn't it? Very creative of Daniel. So Daniel is very switched on. In Babylon, in exile, this Jewish boy who is a believer of the Creator God realizes that he's there on a mission. Daniel was not afraid to go to Babylon in the sense of, hey, what's going to happen? Are we going to... right? He knew the prophecies. He knew what Jeremiah said. He knew that God had predicted that Israel would go into exile. He knew he was going to go there. That is why later in the book of Daniel, he prays to God and says, God, what are you doing? How long? You have said you're going to do something, right? He knew this was a momentarily act of judgment on Israel because they had fallen away. And so what we see of Daniel is that he is missiological, he is mission-driven in Babylon to reach those in Babylon. And so certain things he's like, hey, yeah, let me learn from these individuals, let me learn the language and the literature of the Chaldeans, but let me not compromise my allegiance to God. And in certain things, I will go as far as I can, as much as I can, without pulling away from my convictions about truth, right? So, Ellen White writes this. She says, the king did not compel the Hebrew youth to renounce their faith in the favor of idolatry, but he hoped to bring this about gradually. By giving them names significant of idolatry, by bringing them into close association with idolatrous customs, and under the influence of seductive rites and heathen worship, he hoped to induce them to renounce with the worship of the Babylonians. This is the classic frog in the pot, right? He was like, hey, yeah, come sit at my table. Let's take new names. You know, it will help us to understand you, right? Let's sit in the University of Babylon, right? There's certain things, and Daniel was switched on enough to know which things to take and which things to leave. he realized that there was a form of indoctrination that is happening. Now, I don't want to scare you, but that is happening today still. Indoctrination happens at every single moment. Ellen White says that we should guard the avenues to our mind all the time. Why? Because everything is trying to indoctrinate us to something. Everybody's got some agenda, right? So in some way, as Christians living in exile, not in New Jerusalem anymore, we have to be aware. We have to be intelligent Christians, right? What Nebuchadnezzar wanted to do is both in dietary, political, religious, intellectual, in all domains, not just in the mind, but in everything, he tried to bring him into this. James Ducan, one of the Adventist scholars on Daniel, says this: the goal of cultural transformation. This is at the heart of what is happening here. Nebuchadnezzar wanted to transform the culture of Daniel. The goal of cultural transformation did not limit itself to the intellectual domain, but touched the most intimate aspects of everyday life, including diet. Sometimes, and that's what we'll look at today, is sometimes the small, innocuous, and amoral things, meaning it's not necessarily good or bad, but has an influence on us. Very easy example that we'll speak about today is the influence of the cell phone. Today's social media. Is social media a good thing or a bad thing? No, it's just a thing. It can be used for good, it can be used for evil, right? But oftentimes, we are shaped by those things. We are shaped by our use of the technology, right? We are shaped by certain things around us that make us think and make us reason in a specific way. So we need to be aware as Christians what is shaping the world in order for us to reach them and to gain them. Point number 2 of the story is followers of God are not to segregate from culture. We are not to be like, whoa, we're not going to touch culture, we're going to step away, right? We're also not to be syncretic, meaning we get so closely connected to culture that people cannot distinguish us and other people. We should serve within this culture for the glory of God. To make it more kind of point and to the point, the idea is that we are not called to isolate from culture. We're not to be separatists walking away and we build our own schools. And this sounds funny as Adventists, but build our own schools, build our own hospitals, build our own everything and not get in touch with the world. We can't do that, right? There are certain Adventists that go from cradle to grave and they never really interact with any secular person, right? Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't have our own schools, we shouldn't have our hospitals, we shouldn't have all of these things. But we must remember, we are the salt of the earth. How are we to make this earth salty with our flavor if we are disconnected from them? So we shouldn't isolate. We also shouldn't imitate. That we are so worldly that people don't know anything different, right? We should incarnate. One of the guys I spoke about yesterday, Charles Taylor, speaks about this idea of excarnational and incarnational belief. Excarnational belief is the idea, excarnational, exit, outside, is this idea that belief is merely a thing that you have in your head, merely belief that you were sent to. It doesn't change how you live, right? You just believe it. For instance, an excarnated belief that we as Seventh-day Adventists might have is the idea of the millennium. How has the idea of the millennium shaped or changed your life? Not really. I believe in the millennium. It doesn't change my day today, right? We should have incarnated beliefs, right? Incarnated beliefs that all of our beliefs change the way that we live our lives. We believe that God created this world. That means that we should have creation care. We believe that God gave me this body and He dwells in me. That means that my body is a temple, so I should look after my body, right? I should treat other people with respect because I believe that God had created them in the image of God. So I treat them with love and compassion, with respect and kindness. Right? All people, all genders, all nations, all of these things, we treat them the same way because of this belief. This is incarnated belief, right? So we are called to live this incarnational amongst people. That's the point. Now, to do this, Jesus had this idea that this will not necessarily be easy. Right? We need wisdom, and one of the focuses of Daniel, that was one of the focuses of Jesus, that should be one of the focus of us, is prayer. Prayer for wisdom, right? And Jesus said this, He says, behold, I'm sending you out as my people. I'm sending you out as sheep amidst wolves. So be as wise as serpent, as innocent as doves. That's what we're trying to do here. Here we're trying to say, Lord, how can we be more wise in the world that we are ministering to? right? But we want to be as innocent as doves. What does that mean? We want to be gentle, we want to be kind, we want to be moved by love, right? We have a different modus of operandi than the world does. Martin Luther King Jr. said this. He says, there was a time when the church was very powerful, in a time when the early Christians rejoiced at being deemed worthy to suffer for what they believed. He is not speaking about a time in America where the Christian church were at the top of the political totem pole. He's not saying that. He says that there was a time that the Christian church was very powerful, and he's speaking about the early Christian church. Right? They were willing to suffer and sacrifice and give. They were very powerful then. He says, in those days, the church was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideas and the principles of popular opinion. It was a thermostat that transformed the mores of society. We have 12 young Jewish boys that became 11 young Jewish boys that sat face to face with Jesus when he said, go. And they took that seriously. And they didn't say we're going to be like the world. They changed the world. And those 12 men changed the world. In one day, 2,000 were added. And then more thousands and thousands. And eventually, after a few years, there were millions of Christians. Because they're like, there's something different to these guys than to the world, right? So today, we are called to be what? A thermostat or a thermometer? Thermostats. We need to change the temperature, not just record the temperature, right? Now, to do this, he says to us, we need two things. He says, we must combine the toughness of the serpent and the softness of the dove. We need a tough mind and a tender heart. In order for us to be a thermostat that raises the temperature, not just reflect the temperature, we need a tough mind and a tender heart. A tough mind is characterized by incisive thinking, realistic appraisal, and decisive judgment. Right? We need to think about these things. A tough mind is sharp and penetrating, breaking through the crust of the legends and myths and sifting of the true from the false. It means that we should be switched on individuals. God has given us a mind to think. One of the ways that we worship God is by thinking well. We should love the Lord our God with all of our hearts and minds and souls, right? So we need to be tough-minded. I'll be honest with you, sometimes I'm a little bit perplexed at some of Christians and how easily they are fooled by conspiracy theories. I am perplexed sometimes to see at the level of thinking that we do when it comes to mission. We're trying to understand stuff. The reductionism in our church is alarming sometimes. And so for us, if we want to be as wise as Daniel, if we want to be as missional as Jesus, we need to have a tough mind and a tender heart. We need to be like, how can we think about these things, right? And this is the reason that you're here, because you want to think like that. You want to have a tough mind. So the tough mind is an astute and discerning individual. But we also should be tender-hearted. We must not stop with the cultivation of a tough mind. We should also demand a tender heart, right? We should go and we should know that the hard-hearted individual doesn't see people as people. They only see them as objects, as impersonal cogs in some turning wheel. So we should be like switched on in our mind, but we should have a heart for people, a pastoral heart to care for people. So we must combine the toughness of the serpent and the softness of the dove, tough mind and tender heart. So essentially what we need to be is that we need to be cultural climatologists that chart the currents. We should not be weak-minded weather watchers that whine about the wind, right? Sometimes we see little blips and we see certain things and we're like, oh, did you see this? Did you see this? What we need to do is create the ability or the perspective or the paradigm where we can see the cultural climate changing, where the everyday stuff doesn't really affect us in that sense. We make sense of those smaller things in the context of something bigger, right? Once again, if I can be a little bit political, I am very disturbed by the wholehearted acceptance sometimes, even in Australia, of certain individuals, of certain political, I won't mention their names, but you'll know who I'm talking about, of certain political leaders in our world, especially for us as Seventh-day Adventists, that know about the land beast and the sea beast. We know of prophecy. We know of the coming together. We know that there is a dragon that is trying to kill God's people. We know of Revelation chapter 12 and Revelation chapter 13. We know that there is a ferocity from the dragon, from the devil, trying to kill and destroy God's end-time church. we also know that there are two forces, the land beast and the sea beast, that will come, Roman Catholic Church and America, that will come and work together for the same purposes. And I see some people that just go and listen to the one. Once again, if we look at the climate, these things shouldn't perturb us. We were like, oh, what's happening here? Because we know the map. We know the story. We know the prophecy. That is the reason God gives it to us. Amos 3 verse 7 is very clear. God does nothing unless He reveals it to His prophets. Why? So that we do not have to be afraid of what is happening at the end time. But we should be discerning enough not to just follow ideologies. We should not be beholden to any conservative or liberal or Protestant, or we should be beholden only to Christ and Him alone, standing on His scripture and His scripture alone. Right? So we need to be very, very clear. In the same way, when it comes to mission, we need to track what is happening in the world today so that we can see what's happening. Another kind of metaphor, and moving on now, I'm going to speak about a lot of metaphors because it's a lot of data, and I want to make sure that we understand it. So I'm using quite a bit of metaphors here, but it's very similar to seismology, the study of earthquakes, right? You have two things in an earthquake, a hypocenter, meaning under, and epicenter is at the top. So if you think about an earthquake, at the bottom there, at the crust, that is the hypocenter. That's generally where the earthquake happens. The tectonic plates move or smash against each other. There's something that happens on the hypocenter at the bottom, and then at the top, we experience the earthquake at the epicenter. Right? Now, oftentimes, the epicenter could be kilometers away from where the hypocenter happened. Right? It's not necessarily right above each other. So you could have an earthquake here, for instance, but which is the epicenter, but the hypocenter could be somewhere in Brisbane or even further afield, right? And so what we need to realize is that we are experiencing the epicenter, we're experiencing the earthquake, and we shouldn't just be so fixated on the earthquake, but we should say, hey, what's happening here? Why is this earthquake happening? What are the things that have caused this to happen? So for instance, today we know that there's a problem happening, right? Church is declining, but people are still spiritual. So what is leading to that, right? What is leading to that? Very easy illustration of that is, does anybody know what that is? 9/11, right? 9/11. Now, if I had to ask you a simple question, what was the reason for the towers collapsing? Would I be wrong, before you say anything, would I be wrong if I said the reason that the Twin Towers fell in New York City was because of gravity? Would that be correct, yes or no? Yeah, 100%. That is not a wrong answer. But it is an incomplete answer, correct? We know that there's a lot more at play to the reasons why those towers fell, right? There's a lot more reasons to it. So we cannot be so reductionistic to say, well, it was gravity, guys. What's the problem? You should know that there's foreign policy, there's the ideas of Muslim resurgence and religion, and all of these kind of things coming together that led to this event, to this tragic event, right? The same way now that there are certain things that are happening in the world, we have to ask ourselves, why is this happening? So the problem that we have, that we uncovered yesterday, is that religion is declining in a largely spiritually curious society. Meaning, religion isn't declining in an atheistic place where most people are saying, we don't believe in God. That would make a lot of sense. If most people became atheists and there was legitimate reasons of why they don't believe, you'd be like, yeah, that makes sense why they're not religious anymore. But that is not the case. Majority of people believe what I said yesterday, in an open system. Most people believe that there are supernatural things out there. This is growing even more and more, right? Connected to that problem is whatever we are selling, they ain't buying. That's essentially at the problem. Essentially for us as Christians, for us as that's a part of a religious institution, a church, whatever we think that we are selling to people, they are saying, no, thank you. Now, they used to buy it. They used to be interested in it, but not anymore, right? So we have to ask ourselves why. We are not merely talking about the decline of religion, but we are talking about the obsolescence of religion. It has become obsolete for most people, right? Now, once again, obsolescence is a big word, so let me try and explain this. How many of you remember these bad boys? Yeah? Right? I remember those things. I showed my daughter the other day, and she didn't know what it was, right? Like, I remember mixed tapes, right? I remember that if there was a song on the radio that you wanted to listen to and you couldn't record it, you had to be very quick before the radio announcer said something. So you run over and press, record, right? And then you pray that they don't say anything until the song stops, right? And you would be able to give out mixed tapes. Now, today, How many of you still have mixtapes in your house and you use it regularly? Well, a few of you, one or two, right? How many of you still have that kind of rotary phone? No, right? Most of us now have cell phones, right? So what a mixtape and a rotary phone has become obsolete. That doesn't mean that a lot of people still don't use them. We have people that still use them, right? So for certain people, it's not obsolete. They still use it. There's still a function. There's still a utility there. But for majority people, it's become obsolete. The same way, religion is still useful for some people, like all of us here, but for majority of people, it's becoming obsolete. Doesn't have any value anymore. Right? So what is the value? Most Westerners judge religion not by its truth claims, but by its practical usefulness. Most people are not saying, is this true? But they're asking, does this work for me? Right? Now, this shouldn't be the case, but it is the case. We're just describing what is the actual reality here, right? So religion has lost its usefulness. So let's talk about what is the things that most people think that religion should be able to give us, right? Not Charles Taylor, Christian Smith, a sociologist from America, speaks about the 6 imminent goods that religion makes religion valuable. The first one, it promotes morality. This is the most important one. It makes people good people, makes them moral, right? That's why we send people to church. Right, that's why we send our children to a Christian school. Even today still, some people still hold that view. People send their kids to a Seventh-day Adventist school because I want my kid to be a moral child. I want them to learn morality, right? The second thing is that it offers psychological support in hope and hardship. It fosters community, peace, and social cooperation. It provides virtuous role models in leaders, right? The pastors and the leaders of the church, the elders, and all of those things. It functions best when moderate and avoids extremism. Churches generally would bring people kind of more into the middle. This is what it used to do, right? And it reinforces national identity in some context. So in America, if you were a Christian, especially in the 1990s, all right, or even before the 1990s, if you were a Christian, it showed that you were a nationalist, right? You're not a communist, because communists are atheists. Right, in South Africa, the National Party, the Dutch Reformed Church, that if you were an Afrikaner, you were a Dutch Reformed person, right? If you're an Irish person, you're Catholic, right? It's so closely linked to your national identity. These are the kind of 6 imminent goods that Christian Smith speaks about. Yesterday we spoke about this lady called Sarah Isabella Burton, and she says essentially there's only 4 things really. Religion gives us meaning, gives us purpose, gives us community, and gives us ritual. But with the remixed, they now find meaning in one thing, purpose in another thing, community in another thing, and ritual in another thing. They are remixing things. It's like coming to a buffet and be like, oh, I want that, and I want that, and I want that. And the person behind you doesn't eat anything that you're eating, but they're at the same buffet line, right? So what we see now is that people are remixing, and spirituality, or specifically religion, has lost its usefulness for a lot of people, because what they used to get in religion, they get somewhere else now, and what they think is even better, right? So the question that we want to ask in the remaining 20 minutes that we have is, why is this happening? We know that we are living in a world where religion is declining. Why is this happening when people are still spiritual? And why are they going somewhere else? Now, this is very important for us in our mission, because when we understand why they don't buy what we are selling, we can have more meaningful conversations with them, right? Like Daniel, we want to be tough-minded and tender-hearted, that we understand the world that we are in. We want to understand the world that we are in so that we can live faithfully in it. Right, so to understand this, we're going to speak about 3 main things, 3 massive shifts that have changed the world that we are living in. First, we're going to look at an ecosystem. So think about the world, or think about religion as an ecosystem, or an ecosystem that it lives in. And then this ecosystem is broken down, and there's competitive forces or competitive species that has come in. And then we're going to talk about the mechanisms that has driven this, that have changed this world, right? So this is a lot of information. I'm not touching on everything, and I'm happy to have conversations afterwards. But essentially, the first one that I want to speak about is the idea of cultural ecosystem collapse. The idea that the environment that sustained religion for centuries has fundamentally changed. And before I get into that, I want to give you a kind of a brief view. Now, you can do this on a very macro, meaning very big, meso, middle, or even a very close micro level, and all of them will make sense. So I want to give you one of the biggest ones, the macro level. We live in 2025, right? I want to speak about something called peri-reformations. Peri meaning roundabout. So it's not exactly 500 years, but round about 500 years. Now, if you go back 2025 and we go back around about 500 years, was there something significant that happened in the 15th century that was very significant for Christianity? Yeah, 1517, right? The Protestant Reformation, right? Now, if we go back 500 years before that, there was something that has significantly happened in the 1,000 year after Jesus. Does anybody know if something significant happened in the Christian history? Right? Let me help you. Most people say, I heard something. It's a split between the East and the West. Yeah, 1054, right? The split between the Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. 500 years before that, was there something significant that happened there? It was the rise of the Catholic Church, or the Roman Catholic Church taking power, right? 500 years before that is Jesus, right? So it seems that every 500 years, there's something significant that happens. When Jesus started, he says, authority resides in me, right? I am the way, the truth, and the life. 500 years after, when the Roman Catholic Church usurped power, they said, we have the power. It is in the magisterium that we have the power, and the power is in the Pope, right? 500 years after that, the Eastern Orthodox Church said, we have the power now. We have the authority now. 500 years after that, the Protestants said the authority is in Scripture. We are now living 500 years, and I don't understand why. There's a lot of reasons for that, but on a very reductionistic scale, it seems as if every 500 years there is this big something happening in the sociological space where there's a question about who's got the authority. At the moment, the answer seems to be for most people, I do. I'm the authority, right? And so we need to understand that is happening. So it seems as if the world has changed significantly in the space where religion was flourishing. So think about this. There's an ecosystem that is healthy and thriving, and each system kind of feeds into the other system. And as they feed and help each other, it creates this beautiful place. Doesn't that look great? Like, I would love to go and have a dip there today, right? But the world has changed in the last 500 or so years that has left the space for religion very barren and very empty and very broken, right? So the reason that it broke is what we call the population ecology thesis, right? This species in decline. Just like in nature, a species will struggle when it faces disease, invasive predators, or the loss of habitat. So our ecosystem, our religious ecosystem, has started to decline because there's been diseases that have been introduced. There's been spiritual invasive predators and parasites that have come in, and they've lost their habitat. They've lost their home, right? So let's look at some of these, right? So the first one is internal pathogens. Religious scandals, like sexual scandals or financial scandals. Mission drift, where the church is supposed to be missionaries in the world, but we've become all about entertainment. Purity culture, the refusal for all the leaders to hand over leadership have weakened trust and vitality within the church. Right? So there are certain things that we as Christians have contributed to the problem. There's also external invasive species and parasites that have come in. Alternative religions are a lot more prevalent now because of the internet and because travel has become a lot easier. Eastern mysticism and various other ideas are now at our doorstep. It is as easy for me to connect with you as it would be to connect with a friend of mine in Estonia or in South Africa. I can see, and so I can engage and see what is happening in the world. And so as a globalized village, ideas are a lot more proximate, a lot more closer, and now I can investigate and listen to those ideas. 100 years ago, you only knew Christianity if you were a Christian, right? Because that's the only thing that you heard about. That's the only God that you knew. But now there's more options, more ideas out there, and this kind of is a bit of a threat for us. And then there's habitat loss. As society becomes more secular, spaces where religion once thrived is shrinking, right? So we see that this is changing the kind of ecology, the kind of ecological system that religion is in. And one of the ways that it does is, one of the ways that these ideas permeate our ideas is what we call particulate matters in the air, right? It's in the air that we breathe. So imagine to yourself at this very moment that there are lots of pathogens even in the air that we breathe in now. Some of you might not be so sick, so healthy, right? Some of you might be sick. Yeah, you'll all look very healthy and strong, but some of us carry some diseases, right? During COVID, I think we all were a lot more aware of these things. You must wear a mask, you must social distance, you must do all of those things, right? Because we realized that there were pathogens in the sky. Now imagine this, is that today there are mental and spiritual pathogens in the world that we consume. when you're watching reels on TikTok, and when you're listening to a podcast, you're listening to various voices, and not all of those voices are scripturally mandated. Right? Not all of them are rooted in the truth of Jesus, and so they are bringing other ideas, and some of those ideas capture your mind, right? And so we have these pathogens that are infiltrated through us. One of those ideas is expressive individualism. Expressive individualism is this idea that you as an individual is authentic and really you. And you need to go somewhere and find your true self. Have you heard that before? I need to find my true self. I need to trust my inner feelings. That is an idea of romanticism, a philosophy that came up in the 17th, 18th century. So people today are like, yeah, I just want to find myself. I just want to trust my inner feelings. This doesn't really feel right. This doesn't really sit well with me. And this is so commonplace today that we all just kind of trust it. In our Sabbath schools today, when we read the Bible, and we're like, what do you think the Bible is saying? What do you feel the Scripture is saying? Instead of saying, what is God trying to say in this passage? Right? We have gotten to a place where feelings trump everything. This is not something that has happened just overnight. It has taken decades and hundreds of years for this to finally get a tipping point where we are now moved by this expressive individualism. So expressive individualism essentially works like this. I look inside of myself to find myself, my true self, who I really am. And it's mostly moved by feelings. And then I want people on the outside to affirm what I already feel inside. If they don't affirm them, then they're bigots and they're not tolerant. Right? Now, this is a very rare and very new thing in the last 100 years, not even, right? For millennia before that, people looked up to God, then out to the community, to what is their purpose, their belonging, their identity. So we have moved this has shifted, right? How does this happen? Right? Just look at the media today. The media is constantly pandering at your feelings and your emotions. Be yourself, right? Nike, just do it. Just go for it, right? All of these different slogans. Then secondly is this idea of pop postmodernism. Postmodernism is a philosophical move that says that truth is relative, and that everybody has their own version. Just by a show of hands, how many of you have ever read Jacques Derrida? That's what I thought. Right? We have Jacques Derrida, Lyotard, there's one at the back there, Lyotard or Foucault. Anybody who read these guys, right? These are the three major postmodern philosophers. I've asked this for a lot of people, and most people are like, nah, right? Because we don't read them. One, because they're very difficult to understand. Two, they wrote in French. Right? So, once again, by a raising of hands, how many of you like reading philosophy in general? Yeah, generally we don't, right? 1, 2, right? Generally, there's a very small population of people that like philosophy. But philosophical thought has shaped us so significantly. Why? Right? Why has it shaped us? Because there were people, and we'll speak about this later on, early adopters that said, hey, these thoughts are powerful, but most people aren't going to read it. So how do we get them to understand this, or how do we disseminate these ideas? Through stories. The ancient Greek philosopher Plato said this once. He said, the men that tell the stories rule the world. The men that tell the stories rule the world. So the movies that we watch, the series that we watch, the advertising that we have switched onto, the TikTok reels, all of these things are stories that we take in, and there's narratives behind them, there's ideas behind them, there's philosophies behind them. Can you see how it is important for us to have a tough mind in this world? To really be switched on, right? Because these pathogens are there. And then consumerism. The good life is the goods life. How many of us fall prey to that all the time? That the good life is the goods life. The more I have. Let's ask this question. How many of us in our churches struggle for people to commit? How many of us struggle with people that are just saying, man, I would love to serve at church, I'm just way too busy at work. Just have too much going on. Because oftentimes we have fallen prey to the good life is the goods life. So we work more and more and more to keep up with the Joneses. We have fallen prey, all of us have fallen prey to expressive individualism, pop modernism, and consumerism, right? Without realizing that these messages slowly corrode the authority of religion. And then that creates now, so we have this ecological system that is then influenced by these pathogens. And as these pathogens take hold in our mind, as they become kind of a part of us, as they kind of become a part of our thinking, then there becomes a cultural mismatch. There's a vibe that mismatches. The vibe of the church and the vibe of most people, they are not the same vibe, right? So millennials and Gen Z generation growing up with cultural values, the vibe that they have is that everything is imminent, meaning I only care about the here and now. FOMO, have you ever heard of that? I don't want to miss out. I want to experience the here and now. I don't want to, right? That's one thing. Imminent. Individualistic. It's all about me. It's anti-institutional. It's relativist, right? Your truth is your truth. My truth is my truth. And it is deeply distrustful of external authority. So when they encounter churches that they feel rigid, hierarchical, and moralistic, they feel alienated. They're like, man, this church just doesn't vibe with me, right? As a cultural ecosystem, sorry, I missed a slide there. Oh, I didn't. As a cultural ecosystem has changed, religion is like a species struggling to survive in an environment filled with new predators, poisoned air, and a shrinking habitat. That's what we need to realize. So most people view reality differently than most religious people do today. Right? Another analogy that I can use is the idea of a tent. So we're sitting in a tent now at the moment. So think of the poles. If you look around you, there's lots of poles here that keep this canopy above us erect, right? So the sociologist Peter Berger used this analogy, and he said that there is a sacred canopy. So think about the tent itself as the sacred canopy. It is our belief system. It's belief that there is a God, that He loves us. That there's a sacred canopy, and there's various poles that keep that up. So for instance, I grow up in a Christian family, so that's one pole. I go to a Christian school, that's another pole. My friends are all Christian, that's another pole. I go to Pathfinders, that's another pole, right? And so I go to youth group, that's another pole. So all of these poles keep up the sacred canopy. But what happens when you start removing those poles? Eventually the canopy collapses. All right, and so the world that we're living in now is that most people, the canopy is starting to collapse or have collapsed now because they are not connected to church anymore, because they don't go to church anymore. Their families are not religious, or they don't want to press their religion onto them, and so they just, it's your personal idea, it's your own faith. And so in some way, we live in a world where the canopy has collapsed for most people in terms of, or the sacred canopy has collapsed. So the question that we want to move on to now, or the idea, is the competitive market forces that have brought about this difference, or the new players that are crowding out religious authority. So the growing competitive religious market, once a cultural ecosystem shifted, religion faces new competitors. Just like in nature, a new species enter the environment, it disrupts the balance, and religion is no longer the dominant species, right? There's new competitors out there. So here are three that I want to mention. Firstly, neoliberal capitalism and careerism. So capitalism drives us for more. The world that we're living in, and the capitalist society that we're living in, it's a dog-eat-dog world. And if you're not in the rat race, then you're going to be eaten up, right? And so some people know this. So if I need to provide for my kids, and some of these things, as you will see, they're amoral in some way, right? We all want to provide for our families. We all want to give a good life to our children. We want to do these things. And so, but part of that is then saying, hey, I need to make it in this world. It's a dogfight out there, and I need to make sure that I'm making and I'm winning in this. Because if I don't, I might go hungry, right? And so this crowds it out, because now it means people have longer hours at work, they're constantly available for work, which crowds out religion. As that crowds out religion, then religion has less impact in the virtues that it can teach them, right? It also then spills over to intensive parenting. We know that this is a dog-eat-dog world, and so we want to give our children a step up in the world, right? So we start them earlier and earlier with sports and school curriculums and various different things. And once again, it leaves with little space for what? For church, and for church activities, and for teaching opportunities. Then there's the digital revolution, smartphones, streaming, social media. They all soak up attention that once went to worship and community and service. How much time do you spend on the phone? Social media? Don't have to tell me. It's just a rhetorical question. We spend at least 2 to 3 hours a day, most people, on the phone each day. So it's always ironic when somebody says to me as a pastor, I don't have any time. Please, I don't have any time anymore. We all have time. We all have 84,000 seconds in a day, right? We all have 7 days in a week, right? We all have the same time. Some people do a massive amount with their time, and other people do very little with their time. Question isn't time, it's about priorities. What do you prioritize as most important? right? It's the same with neoliberal capitalism, careerism, and intensive parenting. What are the virtues and the values that you think is more important? Is it important for you to send your children to good schools? 100%. They need a good education. Do they need to be engaged in sports and all of these things? Yes. Right? It is important for our children to do all of these things. Once again, we want to be like Daniel that lives in the world. We are being incarnated. We don't want to be isolated. We want to be in the world. We want to be we don't want to be weird. We want to be peculiar. There's a difference. Right? We don't want to be so weird that people are like, man, I don't want to. We want to be peculiar that attracts people to be like, man, there's something special about these guys. Right? So we need to be amongst it. But where's the tipping point where you're saying, there are certain things that I value that we will not sacrifice at the altar of careerism and capitalism. That this is important to us, right? And today that the line is muddied and very difficult for people to kind of figure out, right? And so as that happens, the second thing that happens is a loss of professional authority, right? For centuries, religion had professional control over some of the biggest things in life. If you wanted to know how to live a moral life, find meaning in suffering, raise your children well, religion was the authority. That's no longer true. If you want to know a question, what do? You Google it, right? Most people don't even Google it anymore. They perplexity it, and they check on AI, right? They go to YouTube and see if there's a tutorial on it. Most people don't come to you to church leaders anymore and ask them questions. They just Google it now. Just this beginning of this year in March, I was in America for an exponential conference, and I was sitting in an online church AI workshop, and the guy made a very interesting point to me. He says that most people, millennial and older, right, so probably like 40 years, 35, 40 year older, we all see the internet still as a tool to be used. Right? We want to Google something, we want to find something, and then we go on with our life. But most Gen Zs and younger, they see the internet not as a tool to be used, but a space to be in. Right? So for them to be online, their online presence is as much as their presence in this room. And so if they want to find something, it is as digital natives, it's so easy for them to just go to the internet and speak to their friends online. Right? And so we need to understand that. So once again, I'll ask the question, how are you using your digital footprint for the gospel? How are you engaging with people online? That's a very easy way that we can do that, right? Because the church itself, as an organization, has lost its professional authority. This talk is going to be a lot longer if this clicker doesn't work. Let's see. Can you move the slide on for me there, please? All right, so we'll wait for Gary. Is Gary here? Let's see. There we go. The religious marketplace is oversaturated. New species, career, parenting, media, therapy, and entertainment have pushed religion out of the dominant position. What seems essential, what's used to seem essential, now feels optional, even unnecessary, right? And then the last one that we'll speak about is this idea of the mechanisms that cause this, right? So we see that there's an ecosystem that was flourishing and beautiful. There was a beautiful tent that was set up. Everybody was happy. Everybody was Christian. Everybody was flourishing, all of these things, right? But then essentially more pathogens came in, more other species came in. There were more parasites that came in, and that came in because of the pathogens in the sky and various other reasons that kind of infiltrated this ecosystem. And the thing that changed it so rapidly, because now we're seeing a rapid change, is that it didn't just change overnight. It has been a long period that it has changed. And one of the reasons that it's changed is called the delayed nonlinear change. And what this means is essentially, if you want to think about a big dam, think about a massive dam wall that has kept the cultural forces at bay almost in a sense. There have been people on the fringes that have experimented with non-Christian, pagan, whatever stuff in a generally Christian nation. And they have been purporting and presenting these things. But for a long time, they were on the fringes. They were not centered. They were not the main guys. But there were cracks forming everywhere in the dam wall, right? And as these cracks were forming, they were small enough that it wouldn't do anything. But eventually, as you know, if there's a dam wall and there's enough cracks, what will happen? It will break, right? And so now we're at that place where the dam wall is broken, and now we're seeing this overwhelming kind of pressure. And this has led to this adoption of innovation is how it is spread essentially, right? If you probably have seen this before when you work in marketing or in ideas or want to shift culture in places, you'll always know that there are early innovators and then early adopters. So think about like a Steve Jobs. He was an innovator, right? He brought about the iPhone and various other things. things. So he's an innovator. But then you need the early adopters that adopt those ideas. To really know that that idea is going to get any traction, you need to go over the chasm from an early adopter to the early majority. Where people are like, oh, this is a novel thing. I used to have a BlackBerry. I used to have a Nokia. I used to have all of these things. But this new phone can do a lot more. This seems really cool. And now, more people are buying it. And then you get early majority, late majority, and then later on the laggards. So what we see that for centuries now, there have been people on the fringes that have pushed away the idea that God is at the center, that I can be the number one person in my life, and the authority has changed. And this has been happening for decades and decades and decades and decades. These innovators have moved on to the early adopters. The early adopters have grown and grown and grown. But now we have reached this tipping point where the early majority have now become the majority people, where most people are saying, yeah, that's exactly what's happening, right? So that's what we have seen. And this essentially leads to this avalanche, the tipping point. Think about an avalanche. An avalanche is not just something that happens. There are various factors that lead to this avalanche. So if you go back to I don't have it on the screen today, but if you go look at the report, and you look at various reports from other countries as well, you will see that 2010, that's when things really sped up in the decline of religion. There was always been a decline. But suddenly in 2010, this decline happened 10 percentage points. Like, it's massive, right? Because that's when the avalanche really took on speed, really got maximum velocity. So, the collapse of religion, institutionalism, wasn't sudden. It didn't happen in the last 5 years. It didn't happen in the last 10 years. It's decades in the making. It brewed, it broke, and it swept through. By the time the churches noticed, the world had changed already. The environment has changed. Now, I wanted to read a thing about Friedrich Nietzsche. I won't read it, but essentially, I'll tell you the quick story. If you can read it for yourself, you just Google Nietzsche, the madman. So Nietzsche was an atheist. He wrote in the 19th century, and he actually predicted this. In the story of the madman, have you ever heard of the term God is dead? God is dead, right? The new atheists in the early 2000s, they posted it on buses all over London, right? It comes from this poem that he wrote, with a story in his book called The Madman. And the story essentially is this. There's a madman that comes, walks with a lantern in the middle of the day, and people are laughing at this guy, like, who's this crazy guy, right? And he's walking around and he says, God is dead and we have killed him. And suddenly these atheists are chuckling at him. And the point of the story is that he goes around and he says, God is dead and we have killed him. Who will ever be able to forgive us? Who can take away the blood from our knives? Who will be able to give us the rituals to forgive us of this great sin that we have committed, that we have killed God? And then there's a powerful section where he says, I have come too early. These people don't realize yet what they have done. The thunder and the lightning, sometimes you see it before you experience it. Sometimes you hear the rumbling before you see the thunder. And he says, we have killed God. Our philosophies and ideologies, we have said that there is no God, but we do not realize what that means for our society. That was in the early, I think he wrote this in 1883 or something like this. Right? More than 100 years later, we are now saying, yeah, now we see what is happening. Right? This is a result of these ideas coming to fruition. So why is this important for us in the last 5 minutes of our talk? What I've just described to you is what we call social realism. It's the idea that we are looking at the social reality and seeing as things are, versus theological idealism and pragmatic or programmatic idealism. Theological idealism is just this idea, if we can just tell people the truth, they will believe it and everything will be okay. Or the idea that if we just run the right program and they come to the right program, then everything will be okay. Now, right theology is good. Good programming is good. But the idea is that oftentimes what we see now is that the theological presentation and the right programming doesn't connect with people. Because we still work on this idea that we live in an ecological system where people will just come to us and we're the healthy. But we need to realize that we are actually on the outside here. We are the minority. Did you know that Adventists in Queensland, 0.3% of the population, 84% of Australians 84% of Australians do not connect with the church, even if some of them say that they are Christians, right? So majority of people think that you're weird. Like, man, you go to church every week? You give away 10% of your money to an institution? Like, don't you watch the news? Don't you see what these pastors are doing? Right? The way that we act sometimes is very weird to people. Right? Not peculiar, but they are weird, right? So we need to realize what the world is so that we can have good teaching that goes with them or to them, right? So essentially the key thing that I want us to take away from today is that we need to ask ourselves, how do we show that the gospel of Jesus is not just true, but deeply good and necessary in this world of substitutes? If people aren't buying what we are selling, we need to ask ourselves, how do we repackage, not change, but how do we repackage, how do we communicate, how do we connect them to see that what we have is actually the truth and it is actually good? Because the God of this age, as Paul says, have blinded the minds of men. They have been deceived. Now, quick question. If you're deceived, do you know that you're deceived? Yes or no? No. Most people are deceived by the lies of the devil as they are wrapped up in all of these things that we've discussed today. And they don't see that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. The reality is, there is only one way to the abundant life. There is only one way to the flourishing life, and that's through Jesus. So how do we, with this knowledge, how do we show people in the world that God, it's not only a true story, but it is a good and beautiful and meaningful story to follow? Right? That is the challenge that we have today. The challenge is not that they are closed off and don't want to hear. The challenge is that the Christianity was the main story, but that became corrupt for most people. So then they were looking for alternatives to that. So how do we become the alternative to the alternative? And say, this is the true story. We're the real story. The Christian story that is biblically based. How do we live that out, right? So a few takeaways, last two slides. Takeaway number one, exile is our new normal. We are in exile. We are not in Jerusalem. We are in Babylon. We need to realize that. And like Daniel, we need to have tough minds and tender hearts. Number two, don't isolate or imitate. Don't pull away so much from the culture that you're not in the culture that you can't be the flavor. Don't imitate culture that you're so like the culture that there's no differentiation between you and the world. But incarnate. Live in the world as Jesus did. But change the world. Know culture, but don't fear it. Right? We need to know our culture. We don't need to fear it. Some practical ministry tips. Number one, we need to shift from the attractional to the missional. What does that mean? Jesus said, go therefore and make disciples. Who did he say that to? To each of you. All of you are called to be missionaries in your street, in your family, in your workplace, in your school, wherever you are. There is no, Lord, maybe the pastor should go. I'll get the youth leader to go. I'll get the conference president to go. No. You have been called to be a missionary. There is an onus on you. Let me ask you this question. How many of you believe that it is essential to keep the Sabbath day? Why? Because God commanded us to, right? All of us as Sabbath keepers are like, yeah, we should keep the Sabbath day because God commands us to. Jesus also commanded us to go. To be a disciple that goes is as important as keeping the Sabbath, or not worshiping other gods, or not killing, or not, right? It's a command, it's a moral imperative that Christ has given to us. We can't give that to somebody else. We can't, just like we can't say to, well, my neighbor was keeping my Sabbath for me. My wife was keeping my Sabbath for me. No. We need to do it, right? Focus on credibility, not just relevance. We need to be credible. The church is not seen as credible in the world anymore. How can we build back our credibility? Once again, it comes to the point of, does your neighbor think that you're a credible person, right? Cultivate cultural literacy in your teams, in your churches. Do we understand the context that we're in, the cultural that we're in? Expect a slow build and sudden tipping points. Just like we got into this mess, it's going to take us a while to get out of it. So don't think that you're going to win in a week, right? You need to be able to be like, we need to start doing the right things for the right reasons, and it's going to take a slow build, but essentially it will work. This is why it is called multiplication in the Bible. If you think about Jesus, he started as one man with 12 disciples. Like, that's a very slow process. Jesus was just spending his time with majority 12 guys. But then these 12 guys went to disciple other people, and those people discipled other people. Essentially, you don't have addition, you have multiplication, right? Exponential growth. And then remember re-enchantment. Remember the idea that this world is not atheistic. People are looking for the spiritual. People are looking for the mysterious. If you look at the stats today, a lot of people are going back to Roman Catholicism, specifically the Latin Mass. Why? Because they want mystery. They want experience from the divine. How can we utilize that for faithful gospel mission? Thank you so much for listening. Apologies for going a little bit over time. Let's have a prayer together. Gracious Father, thank you so much for your love and your grace. I pray, Lord, that we would be individuals like Daniel, Lord, that has a tough mind and a tender heart. That we would be able to see the cultural moment that we are in, and that we would be able to worship, to do mission, to reach out, disciple, do whatever you have called us to, Lord, with faithfulness, with goodness, and with your Spirit, Lord. I pray for this church, Lord. I pray for these members in this church today. And I pray, Lord, that you would empower them and enlighten them, Lord, so that they can be faithful disciples for you. In Jesus' name, amen.